I am going to hand it over to my friend, colleague, and brother, Francisco.
Cool. Thank you, my brother. And the ones that just came in, Lev, you're taking care of the house, doing the laundry. Right on, brother. Welcome from the Carolinas. Dancer mover Alexandra's part of the team. She's in Philadelphia. Carrie, she's also part of the team there. She joined in. She's in Northern California. And there's Dante. So let's to begin, just have a nice breath together. Let's breathe together. Nice long spine, and just gratitude today for this space to share and keep fueling each other and inspiring each other and holding each other accountable to carry out what we need to carry out. So nice long spine, nice breath in, nice breath out. Inhaling the earth and the sun, and exhaling with the earth and the sun. One more breath in, one more exhale. Thank you. Salute.
Welcome, everyone. So glad that you all are here again. It's great to see familiar faces, great to see people coming to this Sangha on a regular basis. So I'll give a brief personal introduction of Auntie, and then I always enjoy reading up on people who I know, love, and care about in terms of their professional background as well. So I'll share a little bit of that as well. I've known Auntie my whole life, or at least as long as I can remember. Auntie's a Bostonian, like my dad, and they knew each other from younger years. Later, she came to connect with my mother, and has always been an important part of the family, and an important mentor and role model and example for me personally. I went to Ghana in 1995 and spent time in Kokrobitey back then. I haven't been back since to Ghana or to Kokrobitey. So I'm personally really have a deep desire to go back and see the amazing work that's happened in those 25 years now, Auntie. She's known as Auntie in the community, so feel free, everyone calls her that, which is also an important kind of social structure within the community in terms of how we think about and regard our elders. We've always had Auntie's art up in our house since I was a child, so amazing visual artist. Auntie also was an art teacher at the high school, boarding school that I went to, Milton Academy. And it was really important for me to have that support along with her children, Sekou and Sakari, who are also at the school. They're my cousins and have always been family as well. In terms of Auntie's professional background, and feel free to fill in anything that I might have skipped over, Auntie, if it's important or relevant. But she studied at multiple universities, University of Massachusetts, Goddard College, I didn't know that, which I've been to that school before. Académie Les Beaux-Arts, please help anyone can jump in and help me with pronunciation here.
Académie Les Beaux-Arts.
Thank you. Now this one's harder. Okay, and in Germany, in Dusseldorf, Auntie, it was?
The Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf.
Okay.
Kunstakademie.
Kunstakademie, fantastic. In Dusseldorf, Bunting Fellow at Radcliffe College, and was a part of Project Zero at Harvard University as well. She's the founder and director of the Kokrobitey Institute, which we'll all learn a lot about, and has been doing that work for nearly 30 years now at Kokrobitey in Ghana. And Kokrobitey offers short and long-term residential programs that explore the linkages of art and design, environmental studies, history and culture, with the role of advancing education and development. I'm so excited to bring in and to share my Auntie. I'm sharing my Auntie and inviting her to our Sangha here at Synergy Yoga. So welcome, Auntie Renee Neblett.
Thanks. I have, you know, that was a lovely introduction. You know, Salim's my sweetheart, so anything, you can't believe everything he says. And he's such, anyway, I'm absolutely delighted because he's such an amazing professional, humanist, and person. It's a real gift to be part of this community of discourse. And Salim, thank you, a very heartfelt thank you for the opportunity. And as he said, we're all family here. You know, I love his mom and dad, and his mother's definitely my sister. So we just make sure that's crystal clear. Anyway, just a bit of history. As Salim said, I'm a native of Boston. I'm an African-American. I was raised in a small African-American community, a colored community in Boston. And that's what it was, a real community. And I'll reference back and forth because one reason I found Ghana, once I moved, so endearing was because it kind of reminded me of Roxbury. You know, it had all the things that I was accustomed to living in an African community. You know, your elders were either Miss or Mrs. or Auntie or this one. And, you know, everybody kind of knew who they were, and community was really important. You know, people understood that manners weren't there to oppress you as much as they were to remind you who you were and to help you take your place and outside yourself as an individual and be part of a community. I lived as a young girl. I think I was 15 or 16 when the civil rights movement started. I was very fortunate to be mentored by some absolutely marvelous women. The first among whom was my mother, but others, giants like Miss Elma Lewis and Miss Muriel Snowden and Dr. Adelaide Cromwell, and a whole host of people who were educators in the most sincere way. They didn't care about the information, only the information you ingested, but they cared about who you were as a person. They cared about how you carried yourself. They cared about the kind of values that you would come to demonstrate in your life. They saw you as a whole person. You know, it's education in a kind of apprenticeship model, which I think for me was a very kind of complete way of learning, where the teacher wanted you to learn something, but they also cared about the person you would become. And as I, you know, so we lived through the busing, and then as I matured, you know, I was in the Black Panther Party. In fact, I was the mistress of culture, if you will, for New England. And I married a man who was very active in the civil rights movement, you know, and was in Mississippi with the freedom fighters. And he was one of the, freedom singers, you know. And we ended up traveling with Miriam McCabe and Stokely Carmichael. I'm just giving you a little background quickly. If you want to stop me, you can stop me anywhere. But I think it's important to have a background. I think any good teacher, anytime anyone's sharing information, you're always comfortable when you know that the people with whom you're speaking have the same reference points so that they can understand where you're going. So that's all I'm doing with giving you a kind of synopsis of who I am and how I got to where I think I am. So, I mean, you know, when I came up in the African-American community, you know, there was still that feeling of community and each one take one, you know, there was that notion that we were people still in becoming, you know. And then the movement came along, and I mean, nothing could have been more, I mean, I'm thinking about this moment we're in. And when I think about the whole civil rights movement, and I think about today, it's awesome. It's strange, it's encouraging, it's discouraging, it's painful, and it's awesome. But because when I think of the civil rights movement, and I think the African-American civil rights movement was probably one of the most powerful movements the world has ever seen. And I don't see how, again, anyone could replicate the power of that movement and the incredible intellectuals and moral giants that it produced. from Baldwin to King to Nina Simone to Harry Belafonte to Stokely Carmichael to Bobby Seale to Huey Newton. I mean, you'd be lost to find that power of personality, conscience, and willingness. So that's kind of an introduction to how I'll talk about where we are today. But I don't know what could have been more powerful. And being part of that, and I was part of that, I was very centrally part of that. The whole 9 yards, from Boston to Mississippi to Conakry, Guinea, and traveling with Miriam Stokely all through South America and Europe. And anyway, after that movement kind of quelled, and I watched lots of friends of mine lose their lives, you know, Ralph Featherstone, you know, Fred Hampton. I mean, we could go on and on, Bobby Hutton. I mean, you know, I could say today, I still know people who participated in that movement who were bombed during the bombings in Philadelphia, who are still sitting in prison today. So it's not pretty, and it's a horrible thing. And this has been the story of the African's life since we've been in America. And to be quite honest, at the end of that period, I was rather emotionally exhausted. And I decided to leave America and took an opportunity. I really wanted to. I had dreams of going to Nigeria to join Twin 77, an artist movement in Nigeria, the Embody movement with Uli Bayer and some others. And now, given what I know, I was really lucky that that didn't happen. Because, you know, that if I had gone to Nigeria with nothing, you know, and knowing nothing, it may not have been the most pleasant opportunities. But I was fortunate to have a cousin who married a Liberian and who went to Göttingen to study medicine in Germany. And after we reconnected, she kept saying, oh, come on to Germany. Come on, you know, there's an art academy, you can do it. So I decided to go to Germany, and my goal was to go for a year, and I ended up spending nearly 10 years there. And it was a marvelous education. In fact, I think the German writer Bertolt Brecht tells us that man understands himself best in estrangement. When you get outside of everything you know is when you begin to see who you are. You know, who you are culturally, what things are dear to you, what seems to be the norm. You really understand perspective. And I think as an artist, and I think most of us here are artists, perspective is simply your point of view, literally, figuratively, and conceptually. It's your point of view. And so getting to Germany, you know, you can imagine, here I am coming out of the Black Power movement and I end up in Germany. I mean, it was frightening. I was in Germany in 1974. We used to go weeks, Jack and I, without seeing another dark face. I mean, I remember when I got there after a week, I thought, what am I doing here? Did I go from the frying pan into the fire? Where am I? I felt like a fly in a bowl of milk. And then but what was interesting, because I went the way I did, I couldn't just leave. So as I stayed, I adjusted. And to make a long story short, I became part of the African Students Union. And long story short, Germany taught me a lot of lessons. It taught me what culture means. And I learned to love a culture. I learned to love German culture, even though it wasn't my own. I can remember when I went to the university to visit an English class. And they were doing American literature, and they were studying Paul Laurence Dunbar and Countee Cullen and Claude McKay. And then I went to my professor's house to have dinner one time, and he had a jazz collection that he treated with the same intent and reverence that he did his classical music. And he could tell me when bebop turned into this, and when Charlie Parker met so-and-so and Jelly Roll Morton. He was completely in awe, and everybody was in awe of Negro culture, Black culture, what we had done for America. And I'd never been able to view myself from the lens of others, you know. I can remember the first time I'd go someplace, and when I went to the African Students Union, you know, of course there were Liberians and Nigerians and Cameroonians and Congolese. And people would always ask me, Renee, where do you come from? And on the surface, that's a rather benign question. But for an African American who had always been seen as nigger number whatever, the notion that somebody would look at me and ask and believe I came from someplace worth knowing about changed my life and made me understand what it means to be a human being. It reconstructed my whole language, the language of race politics that I'd been nurtured on in America, where I somehow believed people were organized in some kind of color-coded hierarchy. There's the white race and the yellow race and the red race and the brown race. And all of a sudden the light went on. I realized, miscegenation genus, we're human beings. There's a human race of different cultures and ethnicities. And now I'm not saying, obviously, black and white's not real. It's a political reality and we're still suffering from it. Okay. But anyway, the reason I'm sharing this is because it's the journey that got me to Kokrobitey. So after having that experience of seeing myself in a particular way, I'll tell you another quick story. And Salim, you can keep me on track. And if my stories are getting one too many and you think I'm getting lost, you just say, Auntie, you we have some place to go. You promise?
I promise.
Anyway, when I said that, and then, the whole language of race politics and the idea of identifying, all of a sudden then it became important for me to identify as an African American. And the reason that was important to me, rather than always saying black and white, these kind of opposing abysses of matter, like we're just on two ends of the spectrum, black and white, which is completely non-descriptive. Nobody's anybody in that. You're a mass, like some blob. When I identified myself as an African American was so that people could place me on the geographic landscape of a historical reality. And now that I live in Ghana, I really understand that because I'm not a Ga, I'm not a Tree, I'm not an Ashanti, I'm not a Hausa, I'm not Yoruba. I'm an African American now who is an Afro-American Ghanaian citizen. But anyway, it was important because your culture is based on where you eat, what your experience is, the historical context of your reality. So that's how I started to frame that. And I wanted to be conscious about language. And I can also remember because I had one other experience when I was at the university, at the Kunst Academy, and an Italian friend of mine invited me to dinner. Actually, she invited me to go to Italy with her to visit her grandmother. And I can remember getting to Italy. She lived way up in this little mountain village in Montiano. And I mean, the whole thing was this incredible adventure. We get there and her grandmother could lay it down every day. She was cooking something. I mean, I couldn't finish one meal before I was like, damn, what is she gonna fix next? And after one of those meals, I remembering as a child, I used to think white people couldn't cook. And I remember, so I asked myself, because I was, as an educator, at that time I was writing my fellowship for the Bunting Institute. I sat down afterwards and asked myself, Renee, why would you think that? It wasn't firsthand. My mother never said, Renee, come here, I have something to tell you. I didn't get it like that. And so I listed all the ways that came into my head. Well, in those days, we lived in very segregated communities in Boston. I happened to go to school, and on occasion, I had a Jewish friend when we moved to a new neighborhood, but we didn't go to each other's houses in those days. And my Jewish friend one day shared her cream cheese and jelly sandwich. And I enjoyed it, but it certainly was no match for my fried chicken and cornbread, I thought, So, and then I was in Boston with the Irish, and I always heard about them boiling potatoes. And I thought, okay, one more boiled potato, that's cool, but I'll take my candied yams. And then I can remember in those days, my grandfather was a cook. A lot of my grandfather's friends were cooks, and African Americans were domestics. So everybody I knew had cooked. And so what I understood at the end of that is really based on no information. not what I knew, but what I didn't know, I formed a point of view. And I realized that's how most people often do. It wasn't based on what I knew, it was based on what I didn't know. And so there I was now with my friend up there in Martiano, and her grandmother's slapping it back with the food. And I thought, wow, you know what? I'm going to cook something for them. I want to make my grandfather's biscuits and his fried chicken and some succotash. I'm going to make them a lunch. And so I told her, I said, I'd like to cook for you guys one day. So I cooked the thing, and I made some battered fried chicken and biscuits. And they finished that meal, and they were like, oh, her grandmother said, oh, you fantastic. Oh, my God. And then she said, please, I want my sister to come tomorrow. Please, you cook one more time, please. I said, okay, I'll cook it again. And I remember I was standing in the kitchen, and the smoke was bellowing in my face, and I'm frying that chicken and the biscuits in the oven. And I thought, if some of my friends back home saw me, and then somebody asked them, well, hey, wow, how's Renee? What she's up to? They say, man, she's lost. She's over there frying chicken for white folks. And I realized just how absurd racism is, how absurd this disconnect between cultures and human beings is, that you can't even do the most human things and share who you are one to another. And I made in my mind that I was not going to let that language shape my life. And that's not to say I was going to be unaware of how it shapes lives, but I feel to those whom much is given, much is expected, and you should share what you know. You should learn to have empathy, and you should share what you know. So anyway, long story short, after that, I get back to America. I get a fellowship to Harvard. I go to the Bunting Institute. You know, what a great way to go back to America. You know, I'm enjoying things. Then I get invited to be a kind of artist in residence. I ran the gallery for a couple of years at Milton Academy and was teaching art there. And I can remember getting into that environment, and the woman, I didn't apply for the job. I gave my presentation at the Bunting, my colloquium, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, we'd like to interview for you to teach at Milton. Would you be interested in being in residence there with us? And so that's how it happened, you know. And I got there and I realized I was like on high class welfare. I mean, wow, I had no problems. I had free housing, I had a studio, you know, kids who wanted to learn, all the resources you needed to teach. It was absolutely amazing. And I had one other thing that that happened to me in Germany, I have to say, is I remember I was sharing a studio, you know, with an English painter when I taught at the international school. And, you know, still I'm coming out of America, and everything was, you know, all my stuff was just black and white, just the rage of everything. And then I get to Germany, and you know, so I pick up on that rage. Everything's a tear for Biko, and soon the bush will rumble. And, you know, I'm constantly in this notion of protest and defending myself and being engaged in the movement. And so I'm sharing, here I am, you know, with my printmaking self and all the things in the world I have to get to and change. And here I am sharing a studio with this cashmere sweater, tweed jacketed guy who sits out in the garden with a pipe and is painting landscapes all day. And I remember sometime I'd be over there banging away, and I'd look at him kind of begrudgingly, like, damn, doesn't he have anything to think about? You know, he's doing little studies of rocks. And he and I became very good friends. And I remember learning afterwards, this is all in retrospect, that he was having the real human experience. That's what God put us for. We should all be smelling the roses. We should all have the freedom to look at the sunset. And I think I resolved then never to have my life consumed in protest again. And be clear, I am not for 1 minute sorry. I think as a young person, that's what you do. You know, you have a righteous indignation, and you use your let me just, I can't take that, stop it. You use your energy, you know, you have moral conviction. But by the time I got to Milton Academy, I decided I'm not doing that anymore. They're not, you know, because everything in America is designed to have you in a constant state of reaction, of protest. And what it does is eat up your life. You know, it's like kind of like Ho Chi Minh during the Vietnam War. And they asked, I forget that famous general, you know, the Vietnamese general. But anyway, Americans would bomb. And as soon as they finished bombing, the Vietnamese would get out there, everyone, man, woman, child, start rebuilding the bridge and doing this. And one reporter said, kind of chuckled with him, and he said, I don't understand it. He said, you know the Americans are going to bomb that again. Why do you guys keep building it up? He said, because our goal in life is to build. Fighting the Americans is just a consequence of our doing our work. It's not our work. That's not why I'm here. And so that kind of stuck with me. So by the time I got to Milton Academy and they walked me around, and there were maybe about 8 or 9 African-American students there, and they take me to the Dean of Minority Affairs. The first time I heard that word, I'm not gonna lie, coming from Germany and having been out of the States for 10 years, it sounded like the Office of Bantu Affairs to me. I was like, whoa. You know, I realized in retrospect, I didn't realize it then, I just had a visceral reaction to it. Minority recruiting, affirmative action. I was like, whoa, they kind of institutionalized our second-class citizenship. You know, I thought to myself, that's what happened for a struggle for equal access under the law. They ended up creating a language that institutionalized our second-class citizenship. I said, whoa, these folks are real thinkers. You're not catching me in that web. So by the time I got to Milton, and they introduced me to the dean, this brother who's the dean over 8 students. I was like, whoa. And then of course they asked me to be what was it? The counselor or the advisor for, what was the group? Minorities in Motion at Milton Academy. And it was a tough one because obviously I had a commitment to our children and to being, and, you know, and so I said, well, what, you know, I mean, Minority in Motion, when I first heard the title, it sounded like a pest to me, like somebody should be running behind it with a fly swatter. What is a Minority in Motion? I thought, can't we call ourselves the African American Association or the Black African History Culture Club? Can't we identify ourselves with something? Long story short, okay, got that. So after I saw that was kind of futile and I still needed to have responsibility to the kids, I remember deciding that I was going to visit some friends of mine in West Africa. And I took that trip with the intention of seeing if there was an opportunity to take advantage of Milton's culture, which was an affluent culture where students on every extended break and holiday and Christmas break and summer break traveled to some part of the world. Okay. And so I took the trip, I met some people. I went to Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Togo, went to Ghana, came to Ghana, and met some friends here that I knew in Germany who had built the Academy of African Music and Arts. And it was a pure paradise, a physical paradise. And aside from that, it was just filled with this enormous history, Ghana, you know, the whole history of Ghana and its relationship to the rest of the world. And so after that trip, I remember coming back and thinking, you know, I want to take kids to West Africa, but I had to think why, what did I want to do? And my goal was to extend the perimeters of American education, to allow all students to imagine there's worlds outside of Europe worth knowing about. And then after I had the chance to really go to Ghana and travel around Ghana, I realized, in fact, Ghana, like most of West Africa, all parts of the continent, is an old world to the Americas. Literally, an old world, you know, and part of every American's shared cultural heritage. Because everything we know about America that distinguishes her from Europe mostly is due to the presence of Africans in America. And I'm not trying, and I'm certainly not making light of how we got there, okay, in the most horrific way possible. But in the end, it doesn't matter how cultures come together. When they come together, something dynamic happens, whether you like it or not. And we managed to get the blues out of misery and a delicacy out of swine. You know, everything we know about America is connected to the African presence, the economy. We can thank the Africans for that, the slave labor. Certainly the culture, you know. Rhythm met melody and everything changed. And America's democracy, or the struggle for it, we have been front and center to try to make that place a place where human beings can live in dignity. So everything we know about that continent, the African, has had a pivotal role. So when I first, and when I presented it to my colleagues, I was very careful. I didn't want to crouch it in racist language. I went to my colleagues and I said, you know what, I was thinking about trying to see if we could have a travel study program in West Africa. You're a scientist, Tad. Do you think that as a scientist, that the body of your information could be expanded by looking at marine coasts and the west coast of Africa? Or there's anything on that landscape that could be interesting to you as an environmental scientist? When I went to the history teacher, I asked him, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could imagine having a course like Europe, Africa, and the Pan-American experience as part of our American history? When I talked to my English colleagues, I said to them, is there any way we could look at, is there any relationship between written and spoken text? I mean, oral traditions and written traditions, what do they really mean? Are they really different or separate, or, what does that mean? Because people can write a lie and you can read that. It doesn't mean there's nothing holy about a written word, only that it stays. You have people that transmit stories orally. So what's the value? How do we create textured discourse that allow cultures to interface with one another on a human spectrum? That was my goal. And I also had a subtext. I thought eventually I wanted to have a high school semester abroad in Ghana. And I thought what I would love to do is to see our talented 10, those African Americans that were having access to those exclusive educations, go for a semester and live in the country of their ancestors and know without a doubt that they came from someplace worth remembering. That was my goal. And I'd learned by that time that both Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were on the right track. You only know what you know from the perspective you can look at it. But the interesting thing that happened is the first couple of times I took the groups, and they were mainly Anglo-American kids. And it was like magic, because there these Anglo-American kids were in Africa, and everything they thought about Blackness got blown out of the water. Nobody was angry. Nobody was living in a tree. People were joyous and happy and welcoming and healthy, and they had a ball. And the world opened up in all kinds of ways. And I remember one boy, a young Anglo-American boy, I can see him today, and we used to send him to a homestay. And in those days, Kokrobitey and Ghana was bush. You know that, Salim. I mean, Accra was nothing but a big village. And this young boy, little Anglo-American boy, stayed in this little village. And he said, he came to me later and he said, everybody was so kind to me. And he said, when I was leaving, the elder of the community came and he hugged me. And he said, David, I want you to know you can always come back to this village. He said, and if you get here and I'm not here, if you don't see me, don't think I'm not here. I will always be here and you will always be welcome. And little David came to me and he said, gee, I think he was talking about the I can't even say the word, omnipotence of his soul or anything. Anyway, he touched this young boy's heart. And so, long story short, it was such a humanizing experience for everybody. And then the history, to go to those forts and castles and to really understand what African Americans went through. Okay, so that's another story. But let me say that when I first came to Ghana, that was my mission when I first came. That, to open up Ghana as for American students, and obviously I had a certain focus on African Americans. I wanted our kids to excel, to have the privilege of feeling themselves a human being. But once I got here, and when I came to Kokrobitey, it was paradise. Salim, it was. I had never in my life been any place where there were no lights, no running water, no shops anywhere, all the things I thought essential to daily life. Yet there was a whole world, a whole functioning world there. And it was physically like the Garden of Eden. The water was pristine. In the morning, you saw people moving up and down, foraging, literally getting their crabs and getting snails and picking this leaf and that leaf. And the fishermen would go out and you buy my kenke, I buy your fish. And it was a whole world that was completely self-sustaining. You get a rash and somebody's pounding up this leaf and patting it on you. You say you have a stomach ache and somebody's tells you, okay, get the guava leaf, get this. And I'm not going to say that I didn't think that the place needed to develop, that I don't think that I thought there was no need for development, but I know for sure I never thought of people as being poor. And I know for sure that I was overwhelmed by an intelligence that was not my own. I was overwhelmed by people who knew everything about the flora and fauna in their environment, knew what the root could do, what the bark could do, what the twig could do. I was overwhelmed with that intelligence. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've lived long enough in Ghana, the last 30 years, to watch what so-called development has done to that environment. I have watched the encroachment of an emerging market economy. And I've seen the devastation that has weighed on the environment. I've watched young people no longer aspire to the aspirations of their parents. They don't want to be fishermen or farmers, but at the same time have absolutely no skills or education to access whatever that emerging market economy landscape looks like. And I've watched these kids be thrust into a no man's land of hopelessness. I've watched people who did nothing differently, and all of a sudden they have to pay for gas, they have to pay for water, they have to pay for this. And I've watched people in the name of development become poor and landscapes ravished. And watching that made me know that I could not focus only on people coming from abroad, but I had to live where I was. And that's when I decided that I was going to focus my activities as well on sustainability, the relationship between art, culture, design, sustainability, okay, and sustainable development. And the first project I did from that perspective, and it was slow starting, was I designed a school bag using the advertising banner from Flexi's. I'm going to stop in a minute right here because I think I've said enough. I think it's enough to say where I am, and I'll let people talk about what we're doing now. But essentially, Kokrobitey has tried to morph into an environment that understands that if we as human beings can't find a way to have discourse, if we're not sane and sensible enough to recognize racism as a mental illness, if we're not sane and sensible enough to expand how we think about literacy, that it's not confined to the ability to read, write, and comprehend the written and spoken word, but real literacy is the ability to read your environment, to know where you are, to know what nature gives you and what you have to give it so it keeps giving. And so we, from that space, began to build the design center. We've started two, what do you want to call them, kind of green industries. We have a recycled fashion industry and we have a recycled glass project, green glass project, where we slump, melt, cut, polish used glass to make glasses and ornaments and lamps and all kind of other stuff. So that's where we are. And hopefully what we're saying is that, you know, you're not going to be sustainable in New York and not sustainable in Ghana. We're all in this together, you know. And what we're really talking about is global citizenry, you know, because I think the whole idea of nationalism, and again, this is projection, but nationalism, in my lifetime, I can't tell you how many nations I've seen come and go. I don't know where Czechoslovakia is, but it's no longer on the map, you know, that we're human beings that need to make sense of who we are one to another. And it's going to be a hard thing to do because there's a lot of ignorance and a lot of intolerance. But I'm ever faithful. Thank you. So I can take questions or you can show some pictures, Salim, if you want to just run some pictures of the Institute.
Sure.
And can I talk while they're running?
Yes.
Amazingly, you can.
Okay, cool. Well, that's our ocean front. Kokrobitey is right on the South Atlantic coast. Keep going. We can keep it moving.
Okay. Give me 1 sec. Sometimes there's a delay for some reason. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, you can let it just scroll actually, because there's so many images there. It's not worth looking at all of them. But
sorry, Auntie, I'm having let me stop and start again and see if that helps.
No problem.
Take your time, bro.
If not, if we can't do this, people can go to Instagram later and check out some images of the Institute and see what the space is. But essentially, we have a campus that can house about 50 students with seminar space, sports space, and eating facilities. And then and we have, okay, that's part of our fashion line, our trench coats that are all made out of recycled denim. You know, in Africa, the secondhand clothes market, you know, America and Europe have dumped millions of tons of used clothes on the environment. And believe it or not, over 1 million pieces of used textiles go into landfill every week. So one symbolic gesture for us is to take the old jeans, as you can see, we bleach it and do all kinds of things and transform it into a product. And this is that the left to the left is one of our trench coats. And then there's water bottles. Those are our water bottle bags. Those are the water bottles on the dispenser. And yeah, so we fool around with the role of resourceful design in development.
Mm-hmm. So these slides, Auntie, will work kind of in backwards order. I'm not quite sure.
I don't care
why.
how they come. Just go quickly because
Great.
there's a lot of them. I don't care. Yeah. And then you get to see what we do with glass bottles. These are all glass bottles that we collect. And I'm sitting behind the wall that we actually make bricks out of the bottles so that they can look like stained glass. But we also make light shades, lamps. Keep going, Salim. We also, this is an exhibition we did recently where I showed the range of the things we do. We use old plastics and make raincoats, recycled raincoats. I do rugs out of denim. You see that on the left side. Keep going, because there's a lot. And then this is a close-up of a shirt with the glass buttons. And the shirt is made out of an old sheet. We bleach and clean the sheets. We use only the buttonholes from the jeans to make our buttonholes so that everything's recycled. We don't make the buttonholes ourselves. And again, we work with using traditional crafts, batik. And so those are some of the kimonos and keep going. And we try to use every part of the jean. You know, the side jean has a seam and we cut the seams and we use that for weaving, and we actually weave chairs. We make chairs backings with the jean strips. And again, this was just a large exhibition we did, and it's showing some of our furniture we make with recycled wood. The wall hangings that, believe it or not, the rugs are made out of jeans that we cut like in inch by inch strips and stitch, rather labor intensive, but they're artisanal products and we think our people should be paid for them. That's a jean rug, a denim rug that we've done. This rug is it. Now you can get that rug in Hudson in New York at like-minded shops. And then there's where I am now. I'm in my studio. That's the new design center we just built. Oh. And we've just partnered with a German company, Arise. So we started doing coding. That's the building on the left. Just below it, you're seeing the dining pavilion. To the right of the design center is one of our studios, which is on this side of campus. And then Salim, you will remember the seminar room because it's right across from the volleyball pitch that you built. And slowly but surely, we're trying to redo all of our rooms so that everything in the rooms has been made by us. the lamps, the furnishings, and so this is just some of what the housing units look like, housing facilities. And we have organic gardens. So if you come to Ghana, you're going to eat well. Liz, if you come to Ghana, you're going to eat well. You know, you come to Ghana, you got to eat well. We have fresh kale and vegetables and fresh mint, and even the glasses you're drinking out of are old Heineken bottles that we've cut and polished and use as glasses. And, you know, we try to take advantage of what nature has given us and provide a healthy diet. Down you're seeing, on the top is a young student who's doing batiking with us. We do our own batiking, and that's one of our instructors. Down below is some of the, you know, all the kids who work in the sewing, in our sewing facility. We have 40 machines now in the studio, and we trained, all those kids have been trained by us, and we tried to give a more comprehensive training. It's not just learning to sew, but, you know, thinking about communication, how to estimate, how to organize, how to keep time, how to project, you know, how to quality control. Then the bottom right-hand corner is the coding classes we're doing with local Ghanaian kids. And then we rent studio space too, to local artisans. So that's the woman at the top there that's working in our jewelry shop, jewelry studio. And that's our front office. I've moved, that office, Salim was there when you were there. I've moved across the street. My office is in the design center, and that office is now shared by the office manager and the coding program that we do. The picture to the right is looking at the dining facility in the evening. The picture just below the office photo is looking at the second courtyard, the residential area in the second courtyard. And then the picture to the right there is where I am now, but that, you know, we have a mezzanine in the design center. My office is in the mezzanine, so I'm standing at the mezzanine looking down into the design center. You can go. Okay, let's just, you know, and we just opened a boutique now. So there's the Good Ashanti stool, there's the Kokrobitey logo, there's our new boutique, which we're doing over now. Since this pandemic has come, you know, we've had to rethink everything because obviously all of our programs coming from abroad have been canceled. And fortunately, we somehow were looking ahead and created these production units because of that. Now we've got a small subcontract from the government, and we're making masks for the Ministry of Health. And if without that, we would probably have completely collapsed. But then you're seeing the building below is another housing unit, and then that's the design studio. And the picture on the right is the third housing units. We have Block A, Block B, and Block C. And I hope there's a picture of the volleyball pitch that you helped to build when you were 16 years old there somewhere, Salim. Let's keep looking. I hope there is.
Oh, I think this is the first. Yeah, that's the last image, Auntie.
Okay, well, that's enough. I think we've seen enough. So people get a sense of what the space is like and what we're doing. Yeah. So in the words of a good and famous and loving friend of mine, I'll take all questions, comments, or smart remarks.
Thank you so much. Beautiful presentation. I'm so glad, you know, for me, it's been so long since I've had a chance to, you know, have a dialogue, be in conversation, or listen to you. So it's very refreshing. The first kind of thought that comes to mind for me is that it was really amazing to hear your description of kind of weaving, well, your personal history, but then also how you kind of wove your experience moving through different cultures together and how that influenced who you are, your thinking about the world, the way in which you connect to people, and also kind of unpacking some of your understanding or your learning from a young age around what race means, around what culture means. So my question then is, having lived in Ghana for a significant portion of your life, what do you feel like Ghanaian culture, or, you know, African culture, what do you think that we can learn? You know, when I say we, I'm thinking really the West and America, you know, now in this context. So I don't know if I'm articulating quite what I'm thinking, but what do you feel like some of the valuable lessons, or what can we call out from, you know, Ghanaian culture, West African culture, ideology, philosophy, to kind of help, perhaps to help guide us through, even as individuals, but also perhaps as
Well,
on a political level.
I think I understand the question. You know, I'll tell you something that's very interesting about culture that I think I've learned. I don't think anybody really has a monopoly on culture. You go any place in the world and there's not a culture you'll meet that there's not something beautiful about it. I don't care where you are in the world. I mean, whoever thought I'd love German culture? When I was a kid, I never dreamt about going to Germany. You know, but who can pass up a German Christmas market or a cafe and kuchen? Nobody. You know, a good German bread. Wherever you go, there's something. Now, obviously, I think Africa does have something very special. And I can speak about Ghana. But I think most old traditional cultures started the same way. You know, there was a time when every culture could see birds fly overnight and think their wings were some magic, you know, before there were electric lights, you know, and had all kind of mystical ideas and stories about creation and how we live together. I think what's interesting about Africa is that the unfortunate thing about Africa is that it has not developed based on its own history and culture. When you go to Mali, the first time I drove, when I was 60 years old, I bought a vehicle and I drove from Accra to Timbuktu. And driving across Mali was the most surreal experience I ever had in my life, because then you really understand what an ancient African empire must have looked like and what a glorious thing it was when you go to Timbuktu, when you see those stone structures, the wooden doors and the handles that are made of men and women. And I mean, just the spirituality that governed how they created their lives and used natural materials and used what they had in their environment, you know. And the things they did, like if I look at when I came to Kokrobitey and there was this magic village where everything was biodegradable and people were living in a sustainable way. You know what I found that's interesting is that there's nothing magic about culture. Okay, I would ask somebody, you know, what distinguishes anything in long term is education and the value system people have about what they think is valuable to carry forward. Because I used to say to people, you know, I just wish you would remember your culture. You know, why don't you remember your culture? And some people do remember it. But if you ask the person, you know, you used to intercrop and you did this, you'd say, but you could ask them, they could show you what they were doing. But if you asked them why they were doing it, they couldn't tell you. So at some point along the line, there's some need to be educated. What am I doing and why am I doing it? Yeah, people do things traditionally and they just do it because it was tradition. You ask them, well, how come you do that? They say, well, my father did that. Well, why'd you do it? My mother did that. You know, and it's like this famous story of the Italian husband that said to his wife, why do you always cut the tips off of your roast beef before you put it in the pan to roast it? And she said, well, my mother always did that. It tastes better when you do that. And she said, well, why did she do that? So she goes to her grandmother and she says, well, why did you do that, Grandma? You know, blah, blah, blah. You know, cut it off. And she said, well, the pan I had was too small. So I cut the tips off so it could fit in. Okay. So you have to know, what am I doing and why am I doing it? You know, there's nothing magical about tradition. What's magical is intelligence and consciousness and presence. But I do think Africa is at a very special moment because we don't have to follow the mistakes of the West. I think capitalism is a huge mistake. I think industrialization is a huge mistake. I think nation states are a huge mistake. I think when we think about government and development, what are we concerned with? Society. It's about social being. It's about the protection of people. That's why you have organized government. It's not just about business. It's about respecting the dignity of man. And I hope that Africa understands we're not at a place, we don't have to have those high rise, the pandemic has taught us, you don't want to be on the 50th floor and have your only way out an elevator that might go down when the electricity is out. You don't want to have miles and miles of ornamental grass and plants when you could have some fruit or vegetables growing. You don't want to be locked in places where you can't open the window to have fresh air. And you do want to be in some proximity so you can ask your neighbor, you can say help or hello. So that's what I've learned. Obviously, that the cultures are rich. There's something about people that don't have much. I mean, the Irish, there's a lot of similarities with Irish people. Song and dance, that people say, if you go to an Englishman's house, he can have 5 steaks, 6 people come, they're not enough to eat. You go to an Irish person's house and they make soup. Go to an African's house, it's the same way. Everybody eats. It's about how you develop, how you learn to value life, to value your environment, to value humankind. But I do think this continent is in a huge position to be a saving grace. If we could only see its salvation as an extension of all of our salvations, then we want to preserve these green spaces and places. And some of these traditions, understand what they are and why they are, and share them. Is that okay, that answer?
That's great, of course.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, that speaks to what you said earlier, just literacy being knowing your environment and where you are, and that really resonates.
And like what you guys are doing, your body, know your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Your breath.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Air.
That's right.
Water. I mean, when you're in Ghana, one thing I love about being in Ghana, and this is, when you go to the village and people who carry water on their heads, it's amazing what they can do with a cup of water. Most kids take a bath with about a cup of water.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to watch the way people use water. And the amazing thing about that half a bucket of water is it gives you the same sensation. There's something so magical about water. We've just get into this thing about excess, but trust me, at the end of the day, you take your cup, you suds up, and then you splash that last bit over you. You're like, whoa, it does the same thing. Yeah. It does the exact same thing. But when you slap it on your head, when we don't create these false illusions that there's endless, that there's no end to the resources that we have, that they're infinite, when we get rid of that nonsense, then we'll know how to value what we have.
Yeah, for a long time, I would do morning bucket showers, and I did excess. I had 2 buckets, one to lather, and then one to rinse.
Yeah, and it works, doesn't it? It's amazing.
And I loved it. You appreciate it, that rhythm. Yeah.
So, of course, anyone feel free to jump in. I'm going to keep asking some questions. I appreciate Auntie as in addition to the work and Kokrobitey, just as a thinker. So I'm also interested in kind of picking your brain, and also as an elder. That's been become a key piece of what this work is with the Sunday Sanghas. We've been fortunate to have elders be able to come forward in the community. So personally, I really viewed the situation we're in now as kind of medicine for humanity in multiple ways. And that doesn't mean it's not painful. I mean, medicine, like Francisco says, it doesn't always taste good, but right. So I'm curious what you feel like the trajectory is for us as a species on this planet with respect to the current situation.
Salim, I'll be quite honest. I mean, what's heartening is, of course, that more people, that people have had access to more information. More people are really beginning to understand the history of America. Okay? I mean, And I think, interestingly enough, this pandemic has had something to do with it, you know? It's like nature's on our side. We've had demonstrations and histories of protests, but at this moment, we also have time. This pandemic has imposed a moment where everybody's had time to absorb and think and understand what's going on. It's not something we just brushed over. We watched somebody have somebody sit on another human being's neck for 8 minutes or 9 minutes until it crushed the life out of them, and then we just went back to work the next day. It's quiet. We're in a pandemic. The whole world is at a kind of standstill, and we've had a chance to think about all this. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, to be quite honest, I mean, I'm hoping for the best. I mean, it is encouraging to see so many young people and to see people across ethnicities and cultures coming together, and even, across that so-called racial divide of black and white in America, that more people are understanding what's going on. But I'll be honest, I'm also very, very nervous, because I don't think it's a question of reform. I think there's something very basic and very brutal about American culture, unfortunately. Something very, very, very brutal in the culture. I mean, we watch a nation that has watched mass shootings in schools, in public places, at concerts and movie theaters. And we come out and we say a prayer and hold a candle, and it's business as usual. Nobody has confronted the notion that we have a vigilante system of behavior in America. I think it's frightening. And I think if that NRA, we can't stop them to protect their own children, I don't know how much it's going to push to deal with this moment. And I want to make one other point. May I?
Yes, please.
I think, and this is a big leap, but I hope we're all listening to this, because as human beings, you don't want revolution. You don't want things to reduce to fighting. You really don't. You hope for evolution. You hope we can share information and people can arrive at some space of understanding. Okay, we're a bit away from that, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I think at this moment, with the leadership in that country, it's a very dangerous space we're in. Mm-hmm. There's not even a pretense of humanity. There's not. If George Floyd had been a dog, every American would have cried. Yeah. If he had been a dog. Mm-hmm. But we've still got 40-some% of people there that can't even understand our humanity. I mean, and we're let me dare say this. The American experiment, we've had all these high ideals that we've never lived up to. Liberty for all, blah, blah, blah. But you go back, and what it says in our Constitution is that man has the right to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? And when I compare that, say, to the German Constitution, after what they did to the Jews, where their Constitution says we're obliged to respect the dignity of man. Mm-hmm. I think the notion of what kind of principle is the pursuit of happiness and you give everybody a gun? Trump is happy doing what he's doing. What does that mean? When you have that kind of equation, your pursuit of happiness and you have a gun, you have predator and prey, predator and victim. I think right now as Africans and dark-skinned people, we're the obvious victims, but the society, we need to deal with that endemic sense of violence there. Mm-hmm. and hatred. And how do we deal with that? Mm-hmm. And the racism, like I said, it's a mental illness, that sense of violence. Yeah. The Jews exterminated the Jews. They did it on the outskirts of town. They weren't having picnics. Between 1865 and 1917 in America, there were 2,000 picnics where the entertainment was hanging and brutalizing a human being and taking souvenirs off his body. That's right. I think we need to we need to address this stuff and realize just how heavy it is. And it can be dealt with on all kind of levels. It's not just fighting. It's about mental health. It's about history. It's about empathy. It's about love. It's about education. And it's about protection and defiance.
Mhm.
It's a serious moment. I tell you, it gives, because I can't imagine. I don't know where it goes from here. I'm really nervous. I mean, I'm excited that so many people have come to a place where we're locking arms with people who have gotten over the notion of black and white. I'm excited the fact that the whole world is picking up and the world is looking at it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? That we continue to ignite this spirit in the world. You know, and I do think we're in a better position. I don't know how this is going to go, but I don't think we're in it alone anymore.
That's true. And I feel like as well that there's also, I mean, speaking to American politics, I think that there is a next wave of politicians, of Black politicians, of former refugee politicians that also have influence and represent a different voice as well. You know, I mean, we tend to stay so stuck on that man in office, but there are other voices that have influence and have been elected in the U.S. as well. And I think there's also a different train of thought as well coming in, younger generations as well that is really pushing back in a lot of ways. So there is a conflict, right, of political thought in the U.S. as well. That's, I suppose, has always been there.
Well, what I know is that the system of this notion, this economic, what I honestly believe is the economic system. The one we have, this kind of rabid capitalism, and I'm not one that believes that. I believe all people deserve, I don't think everybody's equal. I think we deserve an equal opportunity. Some do work harder and some should make more, and people have different skills. So I'm not talking about flatlining everything, but I know that no one man's labor, when I think of this guy Bezos, who has $100 billion, and during this pandemic, his fortunes have risen to 148 billion. I know no one man's labor is worth that much money. And I know no civilized government wouldn't tax at least 48 billion so that the rest of the people in that society could have health care. That something is wrong with that. And I agree with you, there's a different, but can I tell you something? You know what is interesting is if you look at this on a historical line, when the African came out of slavery, nobody worked harder than that African. We worked hard. We built universities and schools at an unprecedented pace. We went in and participated in government. Even Tulsa and those places were examples of poor whites and Africans coming together and legislating to have things, and they were wiped out. They were wiped out systematically. And that pattern is constant. Yes, we now have Oprah Winfrey's in them, but it's all relative on the scale to what Tulsa was. I'm saying, look and see. I don't think it's going to be easy. I pray, okay? But I don't think it's going to be legislated out. I think because you've had these alliances before where they went and bombed those cities out and took those governments out. I mean, I don't know what it will take for that small group at the top to imagine things should be equitable. And I don't want to sound hopeless. I don't want to sound hopeless because I'm not hopeless, but I know it's not going to be easy. It's not going to, especially this election coming up. I'm frightened by this election because win or lose, it's not going to be win or lose. He's already setting the stage for something. And it's not police brutality. It's not just that. It's housing, it's the economic, it goes to the economics, it goes to that structure.
It goes to the structure.
Even during slavery, only 4% of white Americans in the South were large plantation owners. The rest of the poor whites were overseers or white trash. In order to give them something, that you read the book, How America Made the Irish White. I mean, that whole race thing plays to this system. And it is deconstructing. It is deconstructing. People are seeing the game. But I don't, just watch them at the rallies. These people are insane. That 40% is insane. And I pray, I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I encourage everybody to watch it. Oprah Winfrey had 2 shows called Where Do We Go From Here? It's on YouTube. You should check it out. Where Do We Go From Here? It's a talk with Oprah Winfrey, part 1 and part 2. And they're very powerful. And I have never in my life heard the Black middle class speak like this. I've never before seen so many people across the spectrum of humankind come together in protest like this. So I'm very hopeful, okay? And I know we're on an inevitable course, but I know it is not going to be easy. I find the whole thing rather frightening, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, it also brings up to me then, because the focus has been on America for so long, and I'm here in Kenya, and I'm interested and okay, so I thought my power just, as I say, I'm in Kenya, my power is about to cut. You know about that, Auntie.
I know, hey, it's like when people talk about CP time, we say West Africa makes CP time look like fast forward.
That's right. So it's and I think that, like you said earlier, so much of the world, I think, has such a principal role to play in the trajectory, the so-called developing world or third world. To me, we understand here that all of the resources that support the West come from this continent first. That's common knowledge now, and that the value associated with those resources aren't given to, what's actually paid or what's actually. So there are a lot of things that I think different countries in Africa, different people have to reconsider. And I think part of it is the self-value too. I think living here in Africa, we're still kind of in so many ways in the shadow of post-colonialism, in the sense that, and I say we, that I feel like we here in Africa don't quite understand the value of how we support the rest of the world in the West. And once that value is realized a bit more, then we can start to create the criteria of our own currency, for example, or the value of our own, and if that value was recognized, things could potentially be in a very different place. And I think that's a conversation that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting
and investigate some of the traditional systems. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, I was just reflecting. I'm really loving what your story, Renee, and hearing it.
Thank you.
We haven't had connection for such a long time, and so I follow you through Salim some and through your website, but I haven't heard your story, and it's a wonderful story. So I have a couple of one mundane question. Have you written your book yet?
No.
Oh, okay. So that's not a question. that's a powerful. Your story is a powerful story, and your reflections coming out of that story, because of the story itself, are powerful. And I'm just hoping that you've. So I think so I'm sitting here in Jacksonville, Florida, and in August they're going to bring the Republican convention here.
Oh wow!
In the middle of a growing pandemic, because this northern part of the state in particular, this is why we came here, was that we thought this was an interesting place to experiment on social justice issues in one of the most unreconstructed parts of the country, North Florida. And so we've had some fun here, and over the years. But I am a bit hopeless, actually, about the capacity of this country to do the things that it needs to do. And so one of the things that I've come to believe is that we have to change the story, the narrative that we tell each other, because we've been telling each other lies around the world, around the realities and the history. And so when I asked, have you written your story, have you written your book, if not when, because we need more of that truth-telling that changes the narrative and changes the story that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we've been doing. And because I think part of the challenge is to raise the consciousness of the world around what what is and what could be. So one question I have is that what I see in the streets here a lot is a loss of African ritual. And so I've been doing my own memoir, it's finished. And in looking back on my own life, one of the things I discovered as an enormous loss has been the absence of the connection to Africa and the ritual in Africa, the spirit level and the biggest, grandest story that you're living in. When you talk about going back into Mali and to Timbuktu and living that, that's powerful. I missed that in my life until recently, when I discovered my slave ancestors here, actually in Florida. So I'm wondering what you think about the ways of helping to shift a global consciousness and changing the story and creating rituals that carry this new story and some other consciousness of the possibilities that go beyond this capitalist slavery that we're all in, by the way, whites and blacks. We're all locked up in this slave system.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's not sustainable, and it is self-destructive. And that's scary because a self-destructive system means it will has the capacity to destroy all of us.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering as you think about this kind of challenge, what is it, you said that, what is it that you see from where you're sitting that would help to change the story and create new possibilities?
I kind of think young people like Francisco and Salim, people who are hosting even these kind of events, the capoeira people who are getting more in touch with their human centers and how we're social beings that need to be engaged with one another, and as much as that we can, I think the great value of history is being able to remember those rituals and the things we did and the roles they played in our lives, as functional activities. It's kind of like what has happened to the idea of manners in the Western world. I can remember, for me, they're symbolic gestures, to greet somebody, an elder, you say auntie or uncle or madame or auntie. It's not to suggest that you're any less equal, as much as it is giving you a chance to pause and to imagine there might be, to recognize that moment that there could be something there. I think the whole discourse around our humanity and how we relate to one another and the role that ritual plays in our lives, grooming one another, dancing with one another. What always amazed the kids when I brought them to Ghana is they say, boy, everybody's so happy. And for them, these people are as poor as dirt. Coming from a Western perspective, they're like, firsthand, they look so poor. And then the wealthy kids don't even want to go home. They want to stay down there by the beach and drum and sing and dance. That to get back to the core of who we are, to know that, to feel embraced. That's what secret societies and rituals, that's all they did. They celebrated your humanness. They connected you. And so I think, when you get into those rituals, and obviously based on the locations we're in, all that environment around us are resources that help us do those things better and more authentically. So for me, what I do love about history and the ceremonies and rituals we learn from it is that those things help us rise above the ordinary and come together in community. And I think, America's obsession with convenience, that sick notion. Now, I don't know, sometimes I look at people with the way they dress, whether they're going to a football game or a funeral. I don't know where the hell you're going. There's no occasion. It's like everything's a big shade of gray. What happened to this color scale? What happened to life and color and vibrancy and energy? Convenience. Somehow this capitalist marketing that sold this notion of convenience, where you don't even want to beat an egg. It should come out like powder. What is it? It's a level, and it's all marketing, and if you don't believe America's a the best marketer in the world. Imagine a country with its objective history of genocide and slavery and all of it, the worst healthcare system, the worst education system for the Western world, blah, 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 has sold itself to the world as the beacon of democracy and what everybody wants to be. If that's not marketing, I don't know what is. It's like the opposite, but they've sold it and we all buy it. I think it's about waking up, having dialogue. And what they've done now is demonize the intellect. We went from Bush, okay, who was mildly, who is he? He was barely literate, and we accepted him. And then Obama came, and that was like real cause to say, let's just, being a thinking person is like anti-whatever, democracy, democratic. It's really insane. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about community. I think it's about history and culture and communal celebration, and I think we're richer to know what our ancestors did and why they did them, and to help inform what we might want to do where we are. And to distinguish between what's just tradition, and what should be carried forth. To think, do we want to have circumcision rights? Not necessarily, but so you really need to study culture and traditions to know what we want to bring forth. But that's just my 2 cents, and
Thank you. Thank you.
I know everybody has an opinion on it. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents. But I know I love living in Ghana, and I love that people are so, you're never lonely. You're never alone here. You're never without help in here. Never. And we used to be like that in our little communities. I think of what we lost with the whole integration thing. That little, well, you're from Roxbury. We had a lovely community. I loved my childhood. I loved Roxbury.
We sure did. It's great. It's a great loss there.
We lived in a community. It wasn't a hood. It wasn't a ghetto. It was a community.
Yeah.
So
maybe Auntie, this I feel like you answered a question I asked earlier in terms of what does Africa have to contribute? What do we have to learn? Yeah, I feel like you really touched on it in terms of the value, how central community is to a lot of African cultures. It's the centerpiece. Without that, there's nothing, right? So.
Yeah.
Miss Nesbitt, this is Dante Settles. Sorry I can't put on my camera at the moment. I'm driving on the highway at the moment. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for your speech. Thank you for sharing your auntie Celine, and for your family, being able to provide this wisdom. I'm located in Washington, D.C. I'm a native of Washington, D.C. So I grew up in a place that they used to call Chocolate City. Where we grew up different. I grew up in the northeast part of the nation's capital. One of the things that's very impressive, and which is very interesting, you've recalled so many different names and places where I had the same experience when I was in college. When you said Dusseldorf, one of my ex-football players was from Dusseldorf. And one of my coaches was from Dusseldorf, but they took us to Dresden, and I've never had any interest.
Dusseldorf. Mm-hmm.
Yes. One of my coaches was from Dusseldorf, and I've never even heard of Dusseldorf before. And I got an opportunity to go to Germany in Dresden, and just the opportunity because of what I've been taught in my years of public education and going to a fairly not so cultural college, no HBCU, they would teach me about these things. that I had these assumptions. You know, when you go to Germany, the first thing you think of as a black man is those times in Jesse Owens and the Hitler days and World War II and all these other things. And when you touched on culture, you know, of all these other different places and how they look at the black culture, it completely changed my outlook towards my community, coming back, speaking more with and working with more of the African-American children in my community to tell them how much that they are acknowledged and loved around the world from a cultural stance. How important do you find it in the 21st century now, with myself being a young parent, a fairly young parent, and the importance of traveling our children and traveling with your parents and traveling with that technology of family to expand our perception of the world? Because I've heard you mention you taking your sons, and Salim, you've been able to have a great cultural experience in Africa. So can you express how important that it is for us to get more of our families and children outside of the United States to experience culture and to grow as a family?
Yeah, no, I think clearly, there's nothing like experiencing something. I don't care how much you read about countries and stuff. Whenever you travel there, there's so many more layers that you uncover about what's happening in the world. And essentially, what it does is just broaden people's points of view. It just broadens it allows you to understand the world from various perspectives. And the broader your point of view, or the more literally, when you can physically look at it from this space or this angle or that angle, the better prepared you are to understand where you are, not to tolerate. You should get that kind of language, like you have to tolerate cultures. It's all about understanding, and learning. And it just makes you a better person and helps you understand the world you live in, the people you live in, people you live with. So it's a great education. I'm always amazed when I travel someplace. I remember when I going to China one time, and I ended up in this place in Xi'an. They make you think China's China. Everybody looks alike, and that's not true. I went to China, and their night market, they're all eating food like you're in Lebanon or someplace. It's like, whoa, big mosque in the middle of the city. And then you look there, and there's this huge stone statue, a gift from the Persians in 6,000 something. And I'm like, damn, how did that get here? I mean, the world is an amazing place. You'll know every day, you don't know.
That's why I look forward to. Yes, I look forward to seeing Africa. I was looking to attend Salim's and Francisco's training at Diani Beach. So I look forward to spending some time in which this will be my first time in the continent. So I look forward to experience that and having a great experience. So thank you for sharing so much.
Thank you too, sweetheart.
You should
Go ahead, Fran.
Dante, you should extend your trip and maybe go up visit the
Get to West Africa. Yeah. Dante's a former NFL player, I believe, running back turned yogi. So he and now works with youth with like physical and mental challenges, teaching yoga and functional movement stuff. So yeah, so we look forward to having you out here in Kenya, God willing, Dante, in February when we plan our teacher training. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanna feel the Kwame Nkrumah experience of Ghana, and get a chance to connect with the people. So I look forward to it.
Happening.
Well, you're welcome.
That's right. We have other questions for Auntie. Get in there, Terry.
Hi, Renee, Auntie Renee. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much. It's Salim's told me so much about you, so it's really nice to hear your story. I have a lot of my own
Thank you.
personal experiences that I could relate to. I was in the Gambia in 2000 for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer and was able to travel through Mali and Dogon
Wow.
and down to Ghana as well.
Amazing, huh?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and so everything you're saying, I think for me, I've tried to express it as there's a rawness to life in
I
Africa.
kind of lost you. I hope you get back on.
Uh-oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, for me, when I try and explain my experiences in Africa, I say that there's a rawness to the experiences, this experience of life that feels so vibrant. And it's not necessarily good or bad, but it's there's emergent behavior in the way things operate, of how the matatus can find these tracks similar to a New York subway system, and they're not, it's just, you have to experience it. But I also have a son who's 11,
Yeah.
his father's Kenyan. And so I now face this, I'm scared too, like on a very personal survival level. So I kind of face this question of like, do I go back to Kenya where he can grow up where he's not on stolen land? And, but then are we running away a bit? And so this idea of, I don't know, like, there is a bit of an escape, I think, to be in Africa. And I guess like just this idea of, what do we tell the youth, and I think James Baldwin said, I'm a pessimist, but because I'm human, I'm an optimist, so there is this, and I want to bring my son back, but he wants to live here in the convenience. He loves it, and the video games, and it's,
Where are you now?
in California.
Where are you?
California, Sacramento. So he spent some time in Kenya, and, we've traveled, and, it's just, it's like, where do you raise the youth? I don't want to shelter him, but also like, finding these things of, instilling pride and also safety.
Yeah. No, it's a tough one. I'll be really honest. It's really a tough one. I mean, I moved to Europe, but I really didn't want to raise my son a long time in America, but I mean, obviously we have responsibility wherever we are, I obviously think today Africa is a much more benign and nurturing space to grow up in. It's still, people are still communal. People still, there's still a value about things that are not just material, and I think there's something about learning that and having access to that and being so close to the earth, is, I think, a value. And I don't think you can't have those things there. It's harder to do. It's a bigger struggle. It's hard, the community raises your kids. You can do so much, but there's so much outside of you that raises your kids. That's just a simple fact. There's, it's all those things around. I mean, but I think too, having the advantage of having access to both worlds is an advantage. So, I'd be hard pressed to say do X or do Y,
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult thing to navigate.
Girls.
But
Probably.
And I think, Carrie, too, there's value in the fact that he has spent a portion of his upbringing already in Kenya and Nairobi. He's had experiences, not to say that they're done, but he knows who his aunties, who his grandma, that part of his family, which for me was also, we did make that, to me it did at a certain point become clear that this would be a space that was more in alignment with me and my kids' mom's values in terms of where we wanted to raise the kids. So that's, it is a very personal, question.
Yeah, it's a very personal decision, and it's a big one.
Yeah. And
That's right.
I mean, there's other constraints, and it's interesting. And then if I could just ask, I mean, I know it's a challenging time with COVID, but maybe kind of where do you see Kokrobitey in 5 years? Or kind of in terms of management or sustainability. And then I'm curious too, in terms of the agriculture and nutrition, do you have training programs that focus on food and health, or is it more in the arts and the fabric and?
Yeah, it's more, right now it is. When we do things on food and health, I bring people in to do those programs. So I work with a couple of organizations that produce moringa, do plant-based diets and things like that. So I have those connections. I'm looking, my goal, I never thought about money or getting things, but I realize that that's a real concern. And me, my goal now is to hand over Kokrobitey, showing that it's able to be self-sustainable and make money so that people can see how they can do good and do well. This pandemic has been a real wake-up call for me, because all the ways I depended on making an income were completely decapitated because my programs came mostly from outside and I was doing most of my kind of charitable things here. And now I realize you cannot have that single stream of income. When you come from the West, most people in Africa, because they don't depend on social security and structures that seem as though they're there in stone, are very resourceful. Everybody has multiple streams of income. People think about managing their lives in very, very different ways. And I think I'm now convinced of the value of that. And I'm glad that I made that shift and built the facilities that we have. And in 5 years, as I said, I hope that it's proven to be sustainable and that some young people who share a vision of what the world should look like can see how they could make their life here.
Thank you so much. I've actually been working on moringa for the last several years, so I know some people there, and I really would love to come and visit. So I just wanted to thank you. I'm gonna leave and go pick up my son. So thank you all. It was wonderful. Okay. I would love to chat.
Be in touch. We'd love to talk to you. Yeah.
Liam, thanks again for the connections.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie's a scientist and been doing research on the health properties of moringa here in Kenya, as well as other places. So that's yeah. So it's good to make that connection. I can help connect you guys offline if that's good.
Yeah.
Amazing. That'd be great.
Bye.
Yeah. We'd love to do it. In fact, I have a group. You can look up Girls Garage. Look up Girls Garage. I'm working with a group in California, a girls design group. Look up Girls Garage. Yeah, they're a young design group. They were supposed to be here in July, but they'll be coming next year. They're doing a design project with us.
Yeah. Have you thought of doing anything online? Like an online training?
I'll send you another name.
Cool. Thank you.
I'll send you another name too. Ciao, ciao.
So what we're gonna do, are you okay for time, by the way, Auntie?
Well, I missed my chocolate cake, so
so
I'm
that's
good. So my chocolate cake is gone. So
we kept you engaged, which is good. But the chocolate cake is gone.
The chocolate cake is gone. That was a 615 deal.
What we're going to do, I'm going to end our recording. Anytime you need to move forward with whatever's on your agenda, feel free. I'm going to end the recording here, and we can feel free to continue to converse as we typically do in these sanghas. They oftentimes kind of continue to go on and the conversations evolve. So I just want to thank you formally now for your time, for your work over, these last several decades, these last, few decades with Kokrobitey, and before that, the presentation, absolutely beautiful, amazing. I think everyone who was a part of it is really touched. We hope that some people will have the chance to visit this Sangha in its recorded form. Like I said, it'll be on our platform. And I want to thank you for all the work you've done, who you are as a person, your thoughtfulness, your insight. Always for me, like I said at the top of the conversation, so impressionable and influential on who I am as a person. And I think that the people who joined us this evening in Kenya time, felt some of that as well. So on behalf of everyone who's here, thank you. And with that, we'll close the recording, and we can feel free to continue on as long as Auntie is available, and then some of us may linger on afterwards as well.
So I'm going to sign off. I've got a friend coming over for dinner, and